The air in the briefing room at Fort Bragg was thick with the stale scent of coffee and tension. Anya Sharma, a captain in her late 20s, stood silently at the back, her eyes fixed on the large digital map that dominated the front wall. The map was a spiderweb of red lines and markers, each one representing a failed operation or a ghost of an enemy they couldn't pin down. They called him the Ghost, a high-value target who had outmaneuvered every patrol, every drone, and every strategy for the last 6 months. Major Davies, a man whose chest was as puffed out as the medals pinned to it, paced before the screen. "The Ghost is a phantom, a myth," he declared, his voice booming with the kind of confidence that came from a long line of successes against more conventional foes. "He's lucky, that's all. A rat scurrying in the dark. Our new offensive will be a sledgehammer. We'll saturate the area, and the rat will have nowhere left to hide." A few of the other officers nodded in agreement, their faces grim but hopeful. Anya, however, felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. A sledgehammer was useless if you didn't know where to swing. She had spent weeks poring over every piece of intelligence, every after-action report, every scrap of data. She saw a pattern, a faint but discernible signature in the Ghost's movements. It wasn't luck, it was brilliance. He wasn't a rat. He was a grandmaster, and they were the pawns. She had tried to voice her concerns, to present her alternative theory. In a private meeting with Davies the day before, he had listened with a patronizing smirk, his eyes glazing over as she pointed to subtle topographical advantages and overlooked communication intercepts. "Captain," he had said, cutting her off, his tone dripping with condescension, "strategy is a man's game. It's about force, about presence, not ... whatever this is." He had gestured dismissively at her carefully prepared charts. "Stick to logistics, Sharma. Make sure the beans and bullets get to the front line. Leave the thinking to us." The memory of his words stung, but she kept her expression neutral. Now, in the main briefing, he was laying out a plan that she was certain would fail. It was a brute force approach, predictable and clumsy. The Ghost would see it coming a mile away. He would melt back into the mountains, and more American lives would be lost in a fruitless chase. As Davies continued, a junior lieutenant, emboldened by the major's dismissive attitude, caught her eye and snickered to his friend. "Think she's taking notes on how to file paperwork?" he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. The friend chuckled, a low rumbling sound that made Anya's blood run cold. She didn't react. She was used to it. In a world of grizzled veterans and hardened soldiers, she was an anomalous, small, quiet, and armed with a mind they refused to acknowledge. The briefing concluded with a round of self-assured nods. The men began to file out, their boots thudding heavily on the floor, their voices a low murmur of agreement with the major's flawed plan. Anya remained behind, her gaze still, locked on the map. Colonel Thorne, the base commander and a man who valued results above all else, paused at the door. He looked at Davies, then at the silent captain in the back. "Major, are you confident in this approach?" he asked, a hint of doubt in his voice. "Absolutely, sir," Davies said with a firm nod. "We'll have him in a week." Thorne's eyes lingered on Anya for a moment longer. He saw the intensity in her stare, the rigid set of her jaw. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers who knew something everyone else had missed. But he was a busy man, with immense pressure from the Pentagon to get results. He trusted his senior officers. He nodded curtly and left the room. Emptied, leaving Anya alone with the glowing map. The laughter from the hallway echoed faintly, a bitter reminder of her place here. She felt a familiar wave of frustration wash over her, a feeling of shouting into a void. They saw her as a woman, a diversity hire, a box to be checked. They didn't see the analyst who could read a battlefield like a book, who could anticipate an enemy's move 3 steps ahead. She walked slowly to the front of the room, her boots making no sound on the polished floor. She reached out and touched the screen, zooming in on a sector in the northern mountains, an area Davies had dismissed as strategically irrelevant. It was a dense, unforgiving wilderness of jagged peaks and deep ravines. Her intel suggested that Ghosts used it as a transit corridor, but her gut told her it was more than that. Her finger traced a faint, almost invisible line on the topographical display. It was an old goat path, barely visible, not marked on any of their official maps. It was insignificant. It was nothing. But as she cross-referenced it with the timing of the Ghost's last 3 attacks, a cold realization washed over her. The path wasn't just a path. It was an artery. It connected 3 seemingly random points of attack in a way that was too perfect to be a coincidence. Her heart began to pound in her chest. The sledgehammer wasn't just going to miss. It was going to hit a decoy. The real target, the real nerve, center of the Ghost's operation, was somewhere else entirely, and she was the only one who saw it. She pulled up the satellite imagery, her fingers flying across the screen. There, hidden in a deep, shadowed canyon, almost perfectly camouflaged by the natural rock formations, was a faint anomaly. It was a flicker of movement, a distortion in the pixels that every other analyst had missed. It was small, almost imperceptible, but to Anya, it was a glaring beacon. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of terror and vindication. They were all walking into a trap, The ghost wasn't just planning to evade them, he was planning to hit them, hard, where they least expected it. She had to warn them, but how Davies would never listen. He would laugh her out of his office. She was alone, a Cassandra in fatigues, holding a truth that no one was willing to hear. The weight of it settled on her shoulders, heavy and cold. The lives of hundreds of soldiers rested on her next move. She looked at the screen, at the tiny, flickering anomaly, and a single terrifying thought consumed her. What if she was wrong? But a deeper, more chilling question followed. What if she was right? The base settled into a quiet hum as night fell. But for Anya, the day was far from over. The main lights in the intelligence wing were shut down, leaving only the dim glow of emergency fixtures casting long, distorted shadows down the empty corridors. Her office, a small windowless room crammed with servers and monitors, became her sanctuary. While the rest of the base slept, confident in Major Davies's plan, Anya felt a frantic urgency coiling in her gut. The anomaly on the satellite feed was a splinter in her mind, a puzzle she had to solve. She worked with a feverish intensity, the glow of her triple monitor setup reflecting in her tired eyes. On one screen she had the topographical map of the northern range. On the second, a looping satellite feed of the shadowed canyon. On the third, she had pulled up dozens of seemingly unrelated intelligence files, reports on local black market activity, transcripts of garbled radio chatter from months ago, notes on regional folklore about hidden caves. To anyone else, it would look like a chaotic mess of disconnected information. To Anya, it was a tapestry waiting to be woven. Her hands moved with practiced speed over the keyboard. She cross-referenced timestamps, filtered communication signals, and ran complex search algorithms of her own design. The men who mocked her saw a quiet paper pusher, but they had no idea of her background in signals intelligence and cryptography. Before joining the army, she had been a rising star in a private tech firm, a prodigy who could find needles in digital haystacks the size of continents. She had joined the military after a personal tragedy, seeking purpose, a way to use her skills for something more than profit. Now, that purpose was staring back at her from the screen. Hours bled into one another. She ignored the pangs of hunger and the ache in her back, fueled only by black coffee and the mounting dread that she was racing against a clock no one else could hear. The ghost wasn't just using the goat path as a transit route. The anomaly in the canyon wasn't just a flicker, it was the heart of his operation. She was sure of it. She started to piece it together. The black market reports showed a recent unexplained spike in the sale of high-grade climbing equipment and specialized communication relays in a town 200 miles away. The garbled radio chatter, when filtered through a decryption algorithm she had developed, revealed snippets of conversations about the eagle's nest and the high ground. The folklore spoke of a network of caves in that very canyon, used by smugglers centuries ago, a place the locals believed was haunted. It was all there. The ghost hadn't built a base. He had occupied one. He was using ancient smuggling tunnels to move his men and supplies, completely hidden from their drones and patrols. The eagle's nest was his command center, nestled high in the canyon, giving him a perfect vantage point of the entire region. The communication relays explained his ability to coordinate his forces without being detected. He wasn't a ghost. He was a spider in the center of a vast, invisible web. Anya felt a chill run down her spine. Davies's sledgehammer offensive was targeted miles to the south. While the bulk of their forces were engaged in that pointless exercise, the ghost would have a clear path to his real target. But what was it? Why this elaborate deception? It had to be something of immense value, something they were leaving completely exposed. Her mind raced, sifting through the assets in the region. There were forward operating bases, supply depots, and communication hubs. But Davies's plan, for all its flaws, had at least accounted for the protection of their primary assets. They were all heavily fortified. What were they missing? She pulled up a new set of files, this time focusing on civilian infrastructure projects in the area. The U.S. was funding several initiatives as part of a Hearts and Minds campaign. There was a school, a medical clinic, and a new hydroelectric dam being built on the Kunar River. The dam. Her eyes widened. The dam was a massive project, a symbol of American investment and a critical piece of infrastructure for the entire region. It was nearly complete, but still in the construction phase. Security was minimal, handled by a private firm, not the military. It was considered a soft target, but of little strategic value to an insurgent group. Why would the ghost care about a dam? Unless it wasn't about destroying it, she typed furiously, her fingers a blur. She pulled up the dam's schematics, the construction timelines, the personnel manifests, and then she saw it. A name on the list of visiting engineers scheduled to inspect the turbine systems next week. Dr. Eris Dorn, a world-renowned physicist, specializing in nuclear material. He was there under a civilian cover, consulting on the dam's power generation, but Anya knew his real specialty. He was one of the lead scientists in the country's tactical nuclear weapons program, and he was Colonel Thorne's brother. The blood drained from her face. It was never about the dam, it was about him. The ghost was planning a kidnapping, a high-value target of unimaginable importance. walking into a trap with almost no security? The sledgehammer offensive wasn't just a diversion, it was the perfect cover. While the U.S. Army was chasing shadows in the south, the Ghost would be snatching one of the nation's top nuclear scientists in the north. The room suddenly felt cold and small, the walls closing in. This was a nightmare scenario, a strategic failure of catastrophic proportions. She looked at the clock on her monitor. It was 3:47. The offensive was scheduled to begin in less than 30 hours. Dr. Thorne was scheduled to arrive at the dam in 40-8. She had to act. She couldn't go to Davies. He would dismiss it as a conspiracy theory born of sleep deprivation. He would probably have her reprimanded for wasting resources. Going to Colonel Thorne directly was an option, but it meant accusing his most trusted major of incompetence and risking her entire career on a theory built from digital ghosts and whispers. He might listen, but he might not. The risk was immense. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. The pieces were all there, forming a terrifyingly clear picture. She saw the path of the Ghost's men descending from the canyon. She saw the minimal security at the dam, completely unprepared. She saw Dr. Thorne walking into an ambush. And she saw the headlines that would follow. She had to get a message to someone who would listen. Someone outside the compromised chain of command at Fort Bragg. She knew a man, a Special Forces commander she had worked with on a joint operation. A year ago, Major Jackson E. was pragmatic, intelligent, and trusted her judgment. But he was stationed at a different base, and any communication with him would be a flagrant breach of protocol. It was a career-ending move. If she was wrong, she would be court-martialed. If she was right, she might just prevent a disaster that could destabilize the entire region. She took a deep, shaky breath, her hand hovering over the keyboard. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, a physical force. The faces of the soldiers who would walk into the Ghost's trap flashed in her mind, followed by the image of Dr. Thorne, oblivious to the danger. She thought of the mocking laughter in the hallway, of Davies's smug, dismissive face, and in that moment, her choice became clear. Her career didn't matter. The truth did. Her fingers began to move, typing out a new email, not to Davies, not to Thorne, but to an encrypted address she had memorized for emergencies. The subject line was simple, just 2 words, Eagle's Nest. She began to write, her words precise and urgent, laying out the entire terrifying picture. She attached the key files, the satellite anomaly, the decrypted chatter, the damn She was burning her career to the ground, gambling everything on the hope that someone would see the fire and understand the warning. She hit send, and the message vanished into the digital ether. A profound silence descended on the small office, broken only by the hum of the servers and the frantic beating of her own heart. The message was gone. There was no taking it back now. The morning after sending the encrypted message, Anya walked into the intelligence wing, feeling as though she were moving through a dream. Every footstep echoed in her ears. Every casual greeting from a passing soldier felt like an accusation. She had slept for less than an hour, her mind a whirlwind of second-guessing and anxiety. Had she done the right thing? Had Major Jackson even received the message? Or was it sitting in a spam folder, a desperate unread warning? She tried to maintain an air of normalcy, settling into her desk and pretending to work on the routine logistics reports that were her official duty, but her eyes kept flicking to the live feed of the Southern Territories, where the first units were beginning to move into position for Davies's sledgehammer offensive. It felt like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Around 0900, Major Davies strode into the wing, a triumphant look on his face. "Good news, people," he announced, his voice carrying across the open-plan office. "We've got him. Intercepts confirm a major convergence of Ghost's forces in the Alton Valley. He's taking the bait. The sledgehammer is about to fall." A wave of relief and quiet celebration rippled through the room. Officers clapped each other on the back, their faces breaking into smiles. Anya felt a cold dread seep into her bones. The Alton Valley was a perfect decoy box canyon, with multiple escape routes into the mountains. The Ghost was feeding them false intelligence, pulling their forces further and further away from the real target. Anya knew she couldn't stay silent. The encrypted message to Major Jackson was a long shot, a desperate Hail Mary. She still had a duty to try, one last time, to go through the proper channels. Bolstering her courage, she stood up and walked over to Davies, who was basking in the admiration of his subordinates. "Major," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Sir, I have reason to believe the intelligence about the Alton Valley is a deliberate misdirection." Davies turned, his smile faltering as he saw her. His eyes narrowed. "Captain Sharma, still chasing shadows?" "I see no, sir. I have new data. Strong evidence suggesting the Ghost's primary base is in the northern range, and his target is the Kunar Dam." A hush fell over the nearby officers. They turned to watch the exchange, a mixture of curiosity and amusement on their faces. Davies let out a short, derisive laugh. "The dam? What's he going to do? Steal their cement mixers?" "Captain, I don't have time for your rookie fantasies. We have a real-time actionable target. We're about to decapitate the entire insurgency in this region. Don't you have some supply requisitions to approve? The sting of his public humiliation was sharp, but Anya held her ground. Sir, with all due respect, you're walking into a trap. While you're chasing ghosts in the south, he's going to hit us in the north. It's a classic Bataan switch. I can show you the data. I've seen your data, Davies spat, his voice laced with contempt, goat paths, and campfire stories. It's over, Captain. The adults are handling this now. Go back to your desk. He turned his back on her, a clear and final dismissal. The other officers quickly averted their gazes, some with pity, others with scorn. Anya stood there for a moment, frozen, the blood roaring in her ears. She had been publicly and utterly shut down. Her credibility, already fragile, was now shattered. She returned to her desk, her face burning, and sat down, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. She felt a profound sense of helplessness. She had the truth, a truth that could save lives, but she was trapped in a system that refused to listen, a system where rank and gender meant more than facts and analysis. For the rest of the day, she was a ghost in her own office. No one spoke to her. No one looked at her. She was an outcast, the crazy captain who cried wolf. She watched the screens, her heart aching, as the reports started coming in from the Alton Valley. Contact made, engaging enemy forces. The command center was buzzing with excitement. Davies was being hailed as a hero, a brilliant strategist, who had finally cornered their elusive foe. Anya knew it was all a lie. The forces they were engaging were likely a small, sacrificial unit, designed to put up just enough of a fight to make the deception convincing. The real army, the Ghost's elite unit, was moving silently through the northern mountains, getting into position. As evening approached, a single encrypted email notification popped up on her screen. Her breath caught in her throat. It was from a generic, untraceable address, but she knew who it was from. Major Jackson. The message was brief, just 3 words. Message received. Moving. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made her dizzy washed over her. He had believed her. He was taking action, but what could he do? He was on another base, hours away. He would have to deploy a team covertly, without official sanction. It would be a small unit, likely just a recon team, sent in to verify her claims. It was a sliver of hope, but it was something. The hours ticked by, each one an eternity. The news from the Alton Valley continued to dominate the command channels. Davies was giving interviews to the embedded press, his face projected on a screen in the corner, talking about the imminent victory. Anya felt sick. Then, another message arrived. This one was different. It wasn't an email. It was a direct, secure data burst, routed through a series of anonymous proxies to her terminal. It was a method of communication they had used in the joint op, for emergencies only. It meant Jackson's team was on the ground. She quickly opened the file. It contained a single, grainy image and a short line of text. The image was taken with a long-range lens, showing a section of the canyon wall near the dam. It was the spot she had identified, the eagle's nest. In the photo, barely visible against the dark rock, were figures, men dressed in black, carrying weapons, rappelling down the cliff face with practiced ease. There were dozens of them. The text below the image was chilling. Visual confirmation. Hostile force, larger than expected, far larger. They're not just a small team. This is an army. They're moving on the dam now. We are heavily outnumbered. Repeat, we are heavily outnumbered. Anya's blood ran cold. Jackson's small recon team had walked into the staging ground for a full-scale assault. They were trapped between the Ghost's army and the dam. She looked at the main screen, at the self-congratulatory reports still streaming in from Davies' decoy battle in the south. They were completely blind. The entire command structure was celebrating a phantom victory while a real disaster was unfolding in the north. She had to warn them, but her last attempt had ended in public humiliation. Davies would never believe her, and now he was more convinced than ever of his own genius. Going to Colonel Thorne was still a massive risk, and time was running out. Jackson's men were in mortal danger, and Dr. Thorne was still scheduled to arrive at the dam in less than 24 hours, walking into a hornet's nest. Anya's mind raced, searching for an option. Any option. She couldn't send another message to Jackson. It would compromise his position. She couldn't go through Davies. She was a captain with no authority, no credibility, and no one to turn to. She looked at the grainy photo on her screen, at the dark figures moving with deadly purpose. She felt a surge of cold, hard resolve. Protocol was a luxury she could no longer afford. The system had failed. Now she would have to break it. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly in the quiet office. She walked out of the intelligence wing, her face a mask of determination, ignoring the curious stares that followed her. She wasn't headed to Major Davies' office, or even to Colonel Thorne's. She was heading for the main communications hub, the nerve center of the entire base. They wouldn't listen to her voice. They would have to listen to the truth. She was going to take the grainy photo and the terrifying message from Jackson's team and broadcast it directly to the command channel, hijacking the system to force them to see what they had refused to believe. It was an act of professional suicide, an offense that could land her in a military prison. But as she walked, the sound of her own steady footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. She knew it was the only move she had left to play. The main communications hub at Fort Bragg was a fortress of technology, a cavernous room filled with humming servers and banks of monitors, watched over by a handful of specialized technicians. It was the heart of the base, pumping out a constant stream of data and commands. Unauthorized entry was strictly forbidden. Anya walked in like she owned the place. She strode past the junior airman at the entrance, flashing her ID with an air of authority she didn't feel. "Captain Sharma," she said, her voice clipped and official. "I need to run a priority diagnostic on the primary command channel. Orders from the colonel." It was a blatant lie, but she delivered it with such conviction that the young airman simply nodded and stepped aside. Inside, she made a beeline for an open terminal at the back of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every second felt stretched, distorted. She expected a hand on her shoulder, an alarm, a challenge, but none came. The technicians were focused on their own screens, their attention consumed by the victory unfolding in the Alton Valley. They were all looking the wrong way. She slid into the chair and her fingers flew across the keyboard, her training in cybersecurity taking over. She bypassed the low-level security protocols with ease, her mind a blur of code and commands. Gaining access to the primary command channel, however, was another matter. It was protected by layers of military-grade encryption. It was designed to be impenetrable, but the system had a flaw, a backdoor she had discovered during a security audit months ago. One she had reported, but that had been dismissed as a theoretical vulnerability. Theory was about to become practiced at with a final keystroke. She was in. A warning icon flashed on her screen, unauthorized access detected, but she ignored it. She had seconds at most before the system administrator pinpointed her location. She quickly uploaded the image from Major Jackson's team, the grainy photo of the armed men rappelling down the canyon wall. Then she typed out a single, stark message to accompany it: priority override, AI's North real-time threat at Kunur, DAM hostile force detected. This is not a drill. She routed it directly to the main screen in the Tactical Operations Center TOC, the room where Colonel Thorne and his senior staff were monitoring the battle. She hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, all hell broke loose. Alarms blared through the communications hub. Technicians leaped to their feet, shouting in confusion. The junior airman who had let her in stared at her, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. "Ma'am, what did you do?" Anya didn't answer. She stood up, calmly pushed her chair in, and turned to face the two military policemen who were already running toward her, their sidearms drawn. "Captain Anya Sharma," she said, holding out her wrists. "I'm surrendering myself into your custody." Meanwhile, in the TOC, the celebration had come to an abrupt halt. Anya's message and the terrifying image had flashed across the main screen, overriding the triumphant feed from the Alton Valley. The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the hum of the electronics. Colonel Thorne stared at the screen, his face ashen. The image was grainy, but its meaning was unmistakable. A large, organized, and heavily armed force was moving. On the dam, his own brother was scheduled to visit the next day. "What is this?" he roared, his voice cracking like a whip. "Who sent this? Get it off the screen." Major Davies, who had been holding court with a visiting general, rushed to the command console. "It's a hack, sir. A prank." "It has to be." He tried to clear the screen, but Anya had locked the feed. The image remained a silent accusation. "Get me a direct feed from the dam's security team, now," Thorne commanded. A communications officer, his hands trembling, patched him through. The voice that came back was panicked and breathless. Under attack. I repeat, we are under attack. They came out of nowhere. So many of them. They've breached the perimeter. Oh God. The line went dead, replaced by the harsh static of an empty channel. The blood drained from Davies's face. The rookie fantasy was real. The goat paths and campfire stories were the blueprint for a disaster. He stood frozen, his mind unable to process the sheer scale of his failure. "Sir," a frantic analyst shouted from across the room. "We're getting reports from the Alton Valley. The enemy force, it's vanished. They just melted away. It was a ghost force, sir. Minimal casualties on their side. They held us up, tied down 3 battalions, and then just disappeared." The trap had been sprung. The sledgehammer had hit thin air, while the real threat had struck with surgical precision. Thorne's eyes were fixed on the image on the screen, his mind racing. The dam, his brother, the unauthorized message. "Who is Captain Sharma?" he demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. "She's an analyst, sir," a junior officer stammered. "In intelligence." Major Davies had her on logistics. "Get her," Thorne said, his voice like ice. "Get her in here, now." But Anya was already on her way, escorted by the 2 MPs. The walk to the TOC was the longest of her life. She passed soldiers who stared at her, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger. They didn't know the full story yet, but they knew she was at the center of the chaos that had just erupted. She had broken the rules, shattered the chain of command, and now the consequences were coming for her. As she was marched through the doors of the TOC, a wall of hostile glares hit her. The room was a hive of frantic activity, but it all seemed to stop as she entered. Every eye was on her. Major Davies looked at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. He saw his career, his reputation, his entire world crumbling, and he saw her as the cause. Colonel Thorne stood in the center of the room, his face a thunderous mask. He looked from the chaos on the screens to the small, composed woman standing before him. He saw the captain who had tried to warn them, the analyst his senior officer had dismissed. He saw the soldier who had just committed an act of professional treason to get his attention. The room was silent, the air thick with tension, and the unspoken question of what would happen next. They had a full-scale attack on a critical piece of infrastructure, a high-value American citizen at risk, and their main fighting force was miles away, chasing shadows. They were blind, crippled, and walking into a catastrophe, and the only person in the room who seemed to have any idea what was going on was the woman in handcuffs. Thorne took a step toward her, his eyes boring into hers, searching for an answer, a sign, anything. The weight of the moment, the lives at stake, the potential for a national security disaster, all rested on his next words. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a new report flashed on the screen, this one from the tiny besieged. Recon team from Major Jackson's unit, the men who had been sent to verify Anya's warning. The message was fragmented, broken up by static, but the words that came through were clear and horrifying. The ghost is here. He's leading the assault himself. They're not just taking the dam, They have engineers with them. They're rigging it with explosives. Sir, They're going to blow the dam. The words "they're going to blow the dam" hung in the air of the Tactical Operations Center like a death sentence. The frantic energy of the room collapsed into a stunned, horrified silence. Blowing the dam wouldn't just be an act of destruction. It would be an act of mass murder. The resulting flood would wipe out dozens of villages in the valley below, killing thousands of civilians and creating a humanitarian crisis of unimaginable scale. It was a strategic move of such brutal audacity that no one had ever conceived of it. Colonel Thorne felt the floor drop out from beneath him. This was no longer just about a kidnapping or a military setback. This was a potential war crime being committed on his watch. His eyes, wide with shock, darted from the terrifying message on the screen to the woman standing before him in handcuffs. Major Davies was the first to break the silence, his voice shrill with panic and self-preservation. She knew, this is her fault. She must be working with them. How else could she have known? She's a traitor, he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Anya. Anya didn't even flinch. Her gaze remained locked on Colonel Thorne, her expression unreadable. She had expected this, the desperate accusations of a cornered man. Thorne ignored Davies. His mind was a maelstrom, but one thought cut through the chaos. She had tried to warn them. The quiet captain with the outlandish theories had been right about everything. The location, the target, the diversion. He had trusted the wrong person. He had let arrogance and protocol blind him to the truth, and now thousands of lives were hanging in the balance. The weight of his failure was crushing. "Get these cuffs off her," he ordered, his voice low and guttural. The MPs looked at each other, hesitating. "Now?" Thorne roared, and they scrambled to unlock Anya's restraints. He strode toward her until he was standing inches away, the full force of his rank and his desperation bearing down on her. The room held its breath. They expected him to yell, to interrogate, to demand answers. Instead, his voice was quiet, stripped of all authority, a raw plea from a man at the end of his rope. "Captain," he said, his voice hoarse, "I was wrong. We were wrong." He took a deep breath, the admission costing him dearly. "You see the whole board, don't you? While we were playing checkers, you were playing chess." He looked around the chaotic room, at the panicked faces of his staff, all looking to him for a plan he didn't have. His gaze returned to Anya, and it was filled with a desperate hope. "Tell me you have a way out of this. Tell me you have a plan." This was the moment Anya had been preparing for, the moment she had gambled her entire career to reach. The fear and anxiety that had plagued her for days vanished, replaced by a cold, clear focus. The board was set. The pieces were in motion, and she knew the next move. "I do, sir," she said, her voice calm and steady, cutting through the tension in the room. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. A hush fell over the talk. Every officer, every analyst, turned to stare at her. The disgraced captain, the crazy analyst, was now their only hope. Davies looked on, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. "The ghost thinks he's won," Anya began, her voice gaining strength as she moved toward the main holographic map table. "In the center of the room, he's counting on our response being predictable. He expects us to pull our forces from the Alton Valley and send them on a mad dash to the dam. It's a 6-hour drive through treacherous terrain. By the time they arrive, the dam will be gone, and his forces will have melted back into the mountains." She looked up, meeting the eyes of the officers around the table. "He's right. That is the predictable move, and it's exactly what we won't be doing." With a few keystrokes on the console, she changed the map display. She wiped away the flashing alarms and the chaotic mess of the current situation. In its place, she brought up a new set of markers, a new set of routes that no one had considered. "The ghost has made a mistake," she explained, her finger tracing a line on the map. "A small one, but it will be his undoing. In his arrogance, in his focus on the grand, brutal gesture of blowing the dam, he's overlooked his own vulnerability. She pointed to a location deep within the northern mountains, miles away from the dam, miles away from the Alton Valley. It was the canyon, the Eagle's Nest. This is his command center, but it's also his only escape route. The terrain is too harsh to go any other way. He has to funnel his forces back through this canyon to disappear. She then highlighted a second location. It was a narrow pass, a bottleneck in the mountains just a few miles from the canyon's entrance. And this, she said, is where we'll stop him. A murmur of confusion went through the room. Captain, that pass is 30 miles from our nearest unit. An officer objected. We can't get troops there in time. We don't have to, Anya replied, her eyes gleaming with a fierce intelligence. She brought up another file. It was a logistics manifest, a list of assets in the region. 2 years ago, we prepositioned a small experimental unit of all-terrain armored vehicles at FOB Kestrel. Here, she pointed to a small forward operating base that had been all but forgotten. They were part of a program that was cancelled. The vehicles were left there, in storage. They're fast, heavily armed, and designed for this exact kind of terrain. They can get to that pass in under 2 hours. Colonel Thorne stared at the map, his mind slowly grasping the audacity of her plan. She wasn't focused on saving the dam. She was focused on trapping the enemy. And who, Captain, Thorne asked, his voice filled with a new kind of awe, is going to pilot these vehicles? FOB Kestrel has a skeleton crew of maintenance staff. Anya looked him straight in the eye. Major Jackson's recon team, she said. They're currently pinned down near the dam, but their position gives them a direct line of sight to the Ghost's movements. They can't stop him, but they can track him. The moment he begins his withdrawal, they'll know. And they are less than an hour's trek from FOB Kestrel. The pieces of her strategy began to click into place in the minds of the officers around the table. It was a high-risk, high-reward gamble, a complex and perfectly timed maneuver that depended on a dozen variables all falling into place. It was brilliant. Davies, however, saw his last chance to salvage his pride. It's insane, he sputtered. You're abandoning the dam. You're sacrificing thousands of lives on the hope that a handful of men can reach a forgotten supply depot and stop an entire army. And what about Dr. Thorne? You're just going to let the Ghost take him? Anya turned to face him, her expression cold as steel. The Ghost doesn't want Dr. Thorne, Major. Not anymore. A high-profile hostage is a liability when you're on the run. Dr. Thorne was the bait, just like your forces in the Alton Valley. The moment the Ghost decided to blow the dam, Dr. Thorne became irrelevant to him. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. But he's not irrelevant to me. She zoomed the map in on the dam itself. She highlighted a small, inconspicuous structure on the far side of the reservoir. This is the primary spillway control station. It's automated, but it has a manual override. The explosives the Ghost's team is planting will be concentrated on the main wall of the dam. It's the fastest way to bring it down. They'll ignore this station. They'll see it as insignificant. She looked at Colonel Thorne. We can't stop them from planting the explosives, but if we can get one person into that control station, they can initiate an emergency flood protocol, opening the spillway gates. It won't save the dam, but it will redirect the initial force of the blast and the main volume of water down the spillway channel and away from the populated valley below. It would buy the civilians time to evacuate. It would mitigate the catastrophe. A heavy silence filled the room. The risk was enormous. The person who went into that station would be at ground zero when the dam blew. It was a suicide mission. Colonel Thorne looked at the faces of his men, then back at Anya. He knew what she was suggesting, and he knew there was only one person in the room with the knowledge, the courage, and the personal stake to even attempt such a mission. Before he could say a word, a new message flashed on the screen. It was from Jackson's team. Enemy is pulling back. They've set the charges. Timers are active. We estimate detonation in 60 minutes. The Ghost is leading his main force toward the northern canyon. He's left a rear guard. And sir, they have a hostage. It's Dr. Thorne. They're taking him with them. The new intelligence hit the talk like a physical blow. Anya's brilliant calculation had been wrong on one critical point. The Ghost was taking the hostage. The plan to trap him in the canyon was still viable, but it was now complicated by the presence of one of the nation's most important scientists. And the clock was ticking not just on the dam, but on Dr. Thorne's life. Colonel Thorne's face was a mask of anguish. His duty as a commander was in direct conflict with his fear as a brother. We have to get him back, he whispered, his voice raw. And we will, Anya said, her voice cutting through his despair. She didn't miss a beat, her mind already recalibrating, adapting the plan to the new reality. But first, we save the valley. Then, we trap the snake. Then, we take back what he stole. She turned to the communications officer. Get me Major Jackson. Now. A moment later, the Major's tense voice came over the speaker. Jackson here. We're moving toward Kestrel, but we're seeing heavy enemy movement toward the canyon. They're fast. Major, your mission has changed, Anya said, her voice radiating an authority that no one in the room dared to question. Forget the pass. You need to get to those vehicles and go after them. Your new objective is to harry their rear guard. Don't engage the main force. Just slow them down. Create chaos. Keep the ghost looking over his shoulder. Buy us time. Understood, Jackson replied without hesitation. It'll be a running gunfight, but we can do it. What about the dam? Anya took a deep breath. I'll handle the dam. Colonel Thorne stepped forward. Captain, I can't order you to do this. It's a suicide mission. You're not ordering me, Sir, Anya said, her eyes meeting his. I'm volunteering. She turned to the rest of the room. I need a helicopter and a pilot willing to fly into hell, and I need someone to start evacuating the valley. Now? An immediate, frantic energy filled the room as officers began shouting orders. Finally, united by a clear, albeit desperate, plan. A young wiry pilot stepped forward. Warrant Officer Evans. Ma'am, I can get you there. As Anya and Evans rushed toward the helipad, Colonel Thorne pulled Major Davies aside. Major, he said, his voice dangerously low. You will coordinate the evacuation. You will use every asset at your disposal to get those civilians to high ground. If a single life is lost that could have been saved, I will personally see to it that you spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth. Is that clear? Davies, pale and trembling, could only nod. His career was over. The only thing left for him was to try and mitigate the disaster. He had enabled. The flight to the dam was a gut-wrenching race against time. Anya sat in the co-pilot's seat, the schematics of the dam on a tablet in her lap, memorizing every conduit, every access panel. Below them, the rugged landscape blurred by. In the distance, they could see the massive concrete wall of the Kunar Dam, a silent giant counting down its final minutes. Enemy fire. Evans shouted as puffs of smoke erupted from the hills near the dam. The helicopter bucked as bullets stitched across its fuselage. They've got the landing zone covered. Get me close to the spillway. Anya yelled over the roar of the rotors and the pinging of bullets. On the far side, it's my only way in. Evans expertly maneuvered the battered helicopter, skimming just feet above the churning water of the reservoir. He brought them alongside. The spillway control station, a small concrete blockhouse, perched precariously on the edge of the abyss. The door was 30 feet away, with no platform to land on. It's the best I can do, he shouted. It's enough. Anya unbuckled her harness. She grabbed a coil of rope from the back. When I'm on the ground, get out of here, get to safety. No ma'am, Evans countered. I'll draw their fire. Give you a chance. Before she could argue, he pulled the helicopter up and away, banking hard toward the enemy positions. His side gunner, opening up with a deafening barrage of suppressing fire. It was an incredibly brave, incredibly foolish move. Anya didn't waste the opportunity. She secured the rope, took a deep breath, and leaped from the helicopter, rappelling down to the narrow concrete ledge in front of the control station door. She landed hard, her shoulders slamming against the wall, but she was down. She scrambled to the heavy steel door and began working on the lock. Above her, Evans's helicopter, now trailing smoke, veered off, having bought her the precious seconds she needed. The lock was heavy and rusted. Her hands, scraped and bleeding, fumbled with the mechanism. Behind her, from the main wall of the dam, she could hear the faint, rhythmic beeping of the timers. The sound seemed to get louder with every passing second. Finally, with a groan of protesting metal, the lock gave way, and she stumbled inside the control station. The room was dark and damp, filled with old analog equipment. She found the manual override panel, her flashlight beam dancing across the dusty gauges. She knew from the schematics that it would take all of her strength to turn the massive release wheels. She put her shoulder into the first one, grunting. With the effort, it began to turn, slowly, painfully. Outside, in the mountains, Major Jackson's team had reached the armored vehicles. They roared to life, kicking up dust as they sped off in pursuit of the Ghost's convoy. They caught up to the rear guard in a narrow ravine, and the fight began. Explosions echoed through the mountains as Jackson's small, agile force slammed into the enemy, creating the chaos Anya had asked for. The Ghost, riding in the center of his convoy with his hostage, heard the sounds of the battle behind him. He was furious. This wasn't part of the plan. This was a complication he hadn't foreseen. He ordered his men to speed up, to get to the safety of the canyon. Back at the dam, Anya had opened the first spillway gate. A deafening roar filled the air as a torrent of water began to pour down the concrete channel. She moved to the second wheel, her muscles screaming in protest. The beeping from the main wall was faster now, a frantic, high-pitched shriek. She knew she was out of time. She gave the second wheel one last, desperate heave, and it began to turn. The second gate opened. It wasn't enough to save the dam, but it might be enough to save the valley. At that moment, the world erupted in a blinding white light. The explosives detonated. Anya was thrown across the control room as the concrete structure screamed and tore apart around her. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the main wall of the dam crumbling, and the terrifying, awesome power of the water being unleashed. In the talk, the screens went dead. All contact was lost. A heavy, somber silence fell over the room. Colonel Thorne stared at the static, his face etched with grief. He had sent that brave woman to her death, But then, a new feed flickered to life. It was from a drone they had sent to survey the valley. The image it showed was devastating, but not catastrophic. The dam was gone, but the main force of the water, diverted by the 2 open spillways, was surging down the empty channel. Away from the villages, the valley would flood, but not instantly. The evacuation was working. Anya's sacrifice had bought them the time they needed. A new fire lit in Thorne's eyes. "Get me Jackson," he commanded. Major Jackson's voice came back, breathless and filled with the sounds of battle. "Sir, we have them pinned. The Ghost's convoy is stopped. He's trapped." The rest of the story unfolded with the brutal efficiency of a well-oiled machine. With the Ghost's escape route cut off by Jackson's unit, Thorne was able to divert 2 squadrons of attack helicopters to the canyon. They descended like angry hornets, trapping the Ghost and his men between 2 fires. The battle was short and one-sided. When the smoke cleared, the Ghost was captured, and Dr. Eris Thorne was safe. Weeks later, Fort Bragg was a different place. Major Davies was gone, his career ending in disgrace. In his place, a new office was being prepared, a larger one. In the heart of the intelligence wing, Colonel Thorne stood in that office, looking at the woman in front of him. She stood tall, her arm in a sling, a long scar tracing its way down her temple, but her eyes were clear and bright. Anya Sharma had been found unconscious in the wreckage of the control station, battered and broken, but alive. "The president called this morning," Thorne said, his voice filled with the respect and admiration that went beyond rank. "He sends his personal thanks. The Ghost is giving up intel that will dismantle insurgent networks across the globe. They're calling it the single greatest intelligence victory in a decade." Anya simply nodded. "They've also approved my recommendation," Thorne continued, a slight smile on his face. "Congratulations, Major Sharma. You are officially in charge of all strategic planning for this command." He held out his hand. Anya took it, her grip firm. The men and women who had once mocked her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and reverence as she walked through the hallways. She was no longer the quiet paper pusher, the woman they underestimated. She was the strategist who had outplayed the enemy, the soldier who had walked into hell and come back with victory. She had faced down injustice and incompetence, and with quiet courage and a brilliant mind, she had won. Her war was over, but her legacy was just beginning.